Welcome back. Increasing aggression from Russia and its latest drone attack on Kyiv hitting its energy infrastructure, which led to a blackout at a nearby Chernobyl nuclear plant. Ukrainian President Zelensky accusing Russia of posing a threat now to global security. Denmark, meanwhile, warning that the Kremlin is waging a hybrid war on Europe as European leaders are gathering to discuss Russia's increased drone incursions over NATO allies, including the Danish capital, Poland, Romania, and Estonia. The EU also weighing the transfer of hundreds of billions of dollars in frozen Russian money. They want that transfer to Ukraine, which Moscow is now describing as theft. I raised the issue with European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde recently. Watch. Can you demand that $300 billion in Russian money does not get back to Putin and you use that to rebuild Ukraine?
So far what we've done is make sure that that money stays frozen and is not disposed of by Russia. The proceeds of that money, the interest, if you will, generated by the principal that is sitting there, is used in order to reimburse the loans granted by the EU and the US. My hope, my strong hope, is that as much of that money as possible is used in the negotiations and that all of it is used to reconstruct Ukraine. But this is not my decision. Right. I'm just the president of the central bank.
Well, you are among the most influential voices in Europe, if not the most economically influential voice in Europe. So shouldn't you be able to say this money will not get back to Russia? Mm-hmm. What about sanctions? Would sanctions on Russia work?
Maria, you're right to establish a link between the sanctions and the freezing of that of those funds. And the sanctions have to be imposed and have to be constantly renewed and reinforced if necessary in order to force people to the negotiation table and to extract a peace agreement. But all I can do is give my views to the leaders of Europe in order for them to make the decisions.
Joining me now is the Heritage Foundation Vice President of National Security, Victoria Coates. Victoria, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. I want to get your take on this spiking aggression from Russia. I mean, drones, and even if they weren't armed drones, into Poland, Romania, Estonia. How do you view this?
Well, good morning, Maria. Good to be with you. I think it's not a coincidence that this kind of aggression really ramped up after Putin got back from Beijing last month. And so I think what you see here is a concerted effort between China and Russia to keep the United States and Europe engaged in Ukraine, distracted, perhaps you might say, by Ukraine. And I thought that was very interesting what Christine Lagarde was saying about the frozen Russian assets. I mean, it is high time for Europe to get after this. They are working on their 19th package of sanctions. We're looking at the 4th anniversary of this war next February. They have to take stronger action. What they've done so far hasn't worked. And so, yes, she can make her recommendations to European leaders, but those leaders need to act on the recommendations. And this is the leverage that will bring Putin to the table and bring an end to this horrible war.
So do you want to see NATO allies respond? Because I spoke with the president of Poland just the other day here in studio, and we talked about the $300 billion in money, but we also talked about his assessment of drones coming into Polish airspace by Russia. Watch this. Poland shot down Russian drones after Russia's airspace violation. How many drones have you witnessed, and what is your reaction to this?
We are talking about 21 drones. I have no doubt that this action had been planned by the Russian Federation. Surely this was not a mistake. Our eastern border is under the migratory pressure, so we are in the midst of a hybrid war. The Baltic Sea, which joins a couple of European countries, is a place where there are regular provocations carried out by the Russian side. Now, we witnessed the violation of our airspace. So we can say that this is a regular testing of Poland's defensive capabilities and of the whole of NATO.
So as President Nawrocki, do you want to see NATO allies respond to this, Victoria?
Well, certainly, as the president said, if Russia violates NATO airspace, it is absolutely in our rights to shoot down those drones or those planes, whatever it may be. And he was very clear about that. That is not an act of aggression on our part. That is a defensive act on the part of NATO to prevent Russia from escalating this situation. And I think we're also seeing here, Maria, a divide between what my old boss, Don Rumsfeld, would have called old Europe and new Europe. New Europe, like Poland, is taking the necessary steps to cut themselves off from Russian energy, to defend their borders. They're very, very firm on their sovereignty. But old Europe is consuming more Russian energy than ever. In 2024, they imported more than they ever have before. And they like to point the finger and say, oh, it's Slovakia and Hungary. I'm sorry, those countries aren't big enough to consume the quantities of Russian energy that Europe continues to lap up. And yes, it's cheap. And yes, they say they need it to run their industrial base. But they've got to get off of that energy. And then, that is what is going to squeeze Europe and squeeze Russia rather, and make Europe stronger. So that, I think, is the very powerful message the president had last week at the United Nations to challenge Europe to stand up and actually bring Russia to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that Europeans are still buying Russian oil, but they'll say, look, this is a global market, where, we don't know that we're doing it directly. But you're right. I mean, President Trump has spoken about this so many times. Let me move on to Israel, because it is pushing forward with its full force offensive in Gaza, asking residents to leave the area. Meanwhile, leaders are awaiting a response from Hamas on President Trump's 20-point peace plan, which, of course, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to at the White House on Monday. Victoria, what's your reaction here? Do you think that Hamas is going to give us an answer soon? And if not, the president said he supports Israel finishing the job.
Exactly. And what's different this time, I mean, there are two things about this 20-point plan that are different. One is that it deals with the hostages, that they all come home immediately. And then Israel might consider releasing some Palestinians. But the burden would be on Hamas to let them out. But the other thing that's different this time, Maria, is the unified support from the Arab world for this plan. We haven't had this before, where you have everyone from the Saudis to the Egyptians to the Jordanians to the Pakistanis, Indonesians, all coming out and saying this is the way, this is the path forward. Hamas is really isolated. They don't have any cheerleaders anymore saying, oh, we'll support you and your cause. What they're being told is this is the end game. You have to do this. And so as these countries, including Qatar as well as Turkey, put pressure on Hamas to say, you have to say yes to this, I think there could be a path there. Now, Hamas is sending a lot of very mixed signals. They say to the BBC they're not going to accept it. They say to other people, maybe we will. But I think that pressure has to be unified, and they have to realize if they don't do this, they will cease to exist.
Well, I mean, you just mentioned China a moment ago. I want to get your take on this bizarre story. The Philadelphia Office of Immigrant Affairs is raising the Chinese flag this past Tuesday. They did so in front of the City Hall in Philly. They claim it was a celebration of the establishment of the Chinese Communist Party. The event was sponsored by the Pennsylvania United Chinese Coalition, Victoria. I mean, obviously, no coincidence that this is the birthplace of our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. Your reaction? I know you've got an op-ed for Fox Digital saying this betrays America's founding principles on the eve of our nation's 250th birthday.
Yeah, this is just outrageous, Maria. These United Chinese Coalitions exist across the country. There are some 300 chapters of this, and this is the Philadelphia one. And they do this kind of soft power routine where they're going to raise the communist Chinese flag, and the Philadelphia government said that they were going to do it in honor of Diversity Day. No, this is raising the flag of communist China a mile from where Betsy Ross stitched our first flag. It's outrageous. It has to end.
Yeah, and doing so right there in Philly is just incredible. Victoria, thank you. We'll be watching all of your work, certainly, and that story. Victoria Coates, good to see you. Stay with us. We'll be right back.